The sun did not rise over Minas Tirith. Pippin had learned in his short time wearing the livery of Gondor that even in the shadow of war, dawn still came. Soldiers lit their lamps, horses were fed. The great gates opened to admit farmers who chose defiance over flight. Morning arrived, whether the heart welcomed it or not. But on the 10th day of March, darkness held the sky. He stood on the 7th circle's wall, staring east toward Mordor. The blackness there had weight. It pressed against the white stone, patient and absolute. No orange glow preceded the sun. No birds called. The air tasted of ash and distance. "It is a thing of Sauron's making," Gandalf said beside him. The wizard's knuckles were pale where they gripped his staff. "He drapes the world in his despair that we might forget there was ever light." Pippin wanted to say something brave, something Merry might have said, or Frodo. Instead he asked, "Will it lift when the war ends, one way or another?" They stood in silence. Below them, the city's 7 levels descended like frozen waves. Torches flickered in windows. Companies of men marched through courtyards, their boots a rhythm of borrowed courage. Pippin wondered if courage could be borrowed long enough to spend it when it mattered. A guard shouted from the 3rd level. The cry carried no words at first, only urgency that infected the men nearby. Within moments, dozens had gathered at the eastern ramparts. Pippin saw them pointing. Some fell to their knees. "What is it?" he asked. Gandalf did not answer immediately. His eyes had gone distant, focused on something Pippin could not see. Then very quietly the wizard said, "Someone new has entered the game." The figure appeared on the outer wall of the 1st circle without fanfare or arrival. She simply stood where moments before there had been only stone and shadow. The guards later swore different things, that she had walked up from the gate, that she had descended from the air, that she had been there all along, and they had only just noticed. What they agreed on was this: she wore white and her hair was pale as winter, and she did not move like someone who had climbed 7 levels of stairs. "An elf," one soldier whispered. The word spread like wildfire through dry grass. Elf, elf lady. One of the ancient ones come in the hour of need. She did not correct them. Pippin and Gandalf reached the 1st circle as the crowd began to gather. The wizard moved with purpose, his staff striking stone with each step, and Pippin hurried to keep pace. By the time they arrived, perhaps 50 men had assembled, keeping a respectful distance from the stranger on the wall. She stood with her back to them, looking east. Her cloak moved slightly in the wind that carried the scent of burning. Pippin noticed she carried no visible weapon, no banner, no sign of allegiance. Just robes that might have been travel-worn or might have been ancient. It was hard to tell. "She has not spoken," a captain said, appearing at Gandalf's elbow. His hand rested on his sword hilt, though he made no move to draw. "We do not know if she is friend or..." "She is no servant of the enemy," Gandalf said. "Of that at least I am certain." "Then what is she..." The wizard's expression was difficult to read. "That," he said slowly, "is the question, is it not?" Pippin studied the figure on the wall. She had not turned, had not acknowledged the gathering crowd. Her stillness was complete, the kind that suggested either perfect calm or careful observation. He found himself thinking of statues in old gardens, weathered by time into something other than their original form. Then she moved. It was not dramatic. She simply turned her head, scanning the eastern horizon, and the gathered soldiers flinched as if she had drawn a blade. Pippin caught a glimpse of her face, young in the way of elves' features composed in neutral assessment. Her eyes were green, though the darkness made colors uncertain. "Should we approach her?" the captain asked. "No," Gandalf said. "Not yet." But the decision was taken from them. The stranger descended from the wall in 3 fluid motions, a drop, that would have broken a man's legs, absorbed without apparent effort. She landed in the courtyard, and the crowd parted like water before a ship's bow. She walked toward the gate. Not hurried, not cautious. Each step seemed to carry the weight of consideration, as if she were solving a problem no one else had stated. Gandalf moved to intercept her path. Pippin followed, though his legs felt less reliable than he would have liked. The stranger stopped 3 paces away. This close, Pippin could see details that distance had obscured: the absence of any insignia or heirloom jewelry, the practical cut of her traveling clothes, the faint dust on her boots. She looked like someone who had walked a long road and expected to walk further still. "You are not of this realm," Gandalf said. It was not a question. "No," she said. Her voice was quiet, carrying the same neutral quality as her expression. "I am not. Yet you stand on the walls of Gondor in her darkest hour. Why?" She considered this. Pippin had the distinct impression she was translating the question into something more precise before answering it. "I heard the signal," she said finally. "Something is maintaining a pattern of destruction across a large area. I came to observe." Gandalf's staff tightened in his grip. "Observe?" "Yes. Men are dying in that pattern of destruction," the wizard said. His voice remained level, but Pippin knew him well enough to hear the warning beneath. "This is not an academic exercise." "I know." She glanced past Gandalf toward the black clouds massing in the east. "That is why I came." The captain who had spoken earlier found his courage. "My lady, if you have come to aid us, then Gondor welcomes you. The White City stands in need of—" "I am not here to pledge service," the stranger said. She spoke without hostility, stating fact as one might note the weather. "I am here because that," she gestured toward Mordor, "should not be allowed to continue." Gandalf studied her for a long moment. Pippin watched the wizard's expression cycle through recognition, confusion, and finally something that might have been concern. "What is your name?" Gandalf asked. "Frieren. And you are—" "A mage." The word hung in the air. Mage. Not wizard, not enchanter, not Lady of the Eldar. Mage. Pippin had heard the term before in old stories from the Shire, but it carried different weight in her mouth. Clinical. Definitional. "I see," Gandalf said, though Pippin suspected he did not. "And what exactly do you intend to do, Frieren the mage?" She looked at him directly for the first time. "What needs to be done?" Before Gandalf could respond, a horn blast cut through the darkness. 3 sharp notes, the signal for enemy approach. Soldiers scrambled to their positions. The captain barked orders. Somewhere in the upper circles, a bell began to toll. Frieren turned toward the sound without apparent concern. She reached up, adjusting something at her collar that Pippin could not quite see, and when she lowered her hand, the air around her had changed. Not visibly, but Pippin felt it the way one feels a storm approaching before the first drops fall. "You should get to safety," she said to him. "You are very small to be on a battlefield." "I'm a guard of the Citadel," Pippin said with more dignity than he felt. "I see." She did not sound impressed. "Then guard something worth keeping." She walked past them toward the gate, where the horns were sounding their urgent alarm. The crowd of soldiers parted again, some dropping to one knee, others simply staring. Pippin noticed that none of them moved to follow her. They watched her go, the way sailors watch a strange ship pass in fog, with hope and unease equally mixed. Gandalf stood motionless, his expression unreadable. "Is she going to fight?" Pippin asked. "I believe," the wizard said slowly, "that she intends to do something rather more permanent than fighting. Is that good? Gandalf did not answer. He was watching the pale-haired figure disappear into the darkness beyond the gate, and his silence carried the weight of a man who had just recognized a problem he did not yet know how to solve. Above them, the black clouds pressed closer. In the east, something vast stirred. And on the walls of Minas Tirith, men whispered the word that would define the days to come, elf. They were wrong, of course, but they would not learn that truth until much later, when it no longer mattered what name they gave, the one who had walked out of legend and into their dying world. I cannot even imagine being Pippin right now. Everything is dark and scary, and then this small white-haired girl just pops up on the wall like she is lost on his way to a grocery store. What is so cool here is how she does not act like a wizard or a figure of prophecy. She just calls herself a mage. She feels like a modern scientist lost into a world of myths. She is not even worried about the scary orcs. If you were a soldier on that wall, would you feel relieved or just super confused? I would probably be both. But I'm super curious what's she gonna do next, so let's dive into the next part right away. Gandalf had witnessed many strange things in his long years walking Middle-earth. He had seen the pride of dragons and the patience of Ents. He had argued with Saruman when that mind was still whole, and counseled kings whose fathers he had watched grow from boys into men. But this was different. The mage called Frieren had taken a position on the outer wall, near where the first defenders would meet any assault from the east. She did not speak with the captains. She did not request provisions or quarters. She simply observed as one might study an unfamiliar mechanism before deciding whether to repair or dismantle it. Gandalf found her there as the torches were being lit for the false evening. The dawnless day stretched on, and men moved through their duties with the weariness of those who could not tell if hours had passed or merely seemed to. "You have not rested," he said. She glanced at him, then returned her attention to the darkness beyond the wall. "I rarely need to." "A useful trait in war?" "Perhaps." He leaned on his staff, affecting casualness he did not feel. "You said you came because you heard a signal. What manner of signal calls to one from beyond the circles of this world?" "Dominion magic," she said. "A centralized control pattern attempting to suppress will across a geographic area. It has a resonance." The words were precise, technical. Gandalf recognized the language of someone describing a craft rather than an art. Magic in Middle-earth was woven into the fabric of creation itself, a matter of rite and song and ancient covenant. What she described sounded more like architecture. "And you can sense this," he said carefully. "Anyone with adequate training could." She tilted her head slightly. "Can you not?" "I sense Sauron's malice. His will pressing against the world, yes. But I would not call it a signal." "Interesting." She said it the way one might note weather. "Your magic appears to function through different principles." Gandalf felt a chill that had nothing to do with the wind. How different, she considered. The defensive barrier around this city. It is not a construction. It is more like an agreement. A promise made by stones and men together. She paused. "In my experience, such things are fragile. Intent-based rather than formula-based. And yours is not. Mine is replicable, teachable. It follows consistent rules regardless of who invokes it." The implications settled like frost. Magic that answered to law rather than worth. Power without the need for wisdom's restraint. Gandalf had suspected something of this nature when he first saw her, but hearing it stated so plainly was another matter entirely. "You understand?" he said quietly. Why, that troubles me. I can infer. She met his gaze with those calm green eyes. You are concerned I represent a means to shortcut consequences. That is reasonable. And yet you remain. The pattern continues. Therefore, I remain. Before Gandalf could respond, footsteps echoed on the stone behind them. He turned to see a contingent of the tower guard approaching, and at their head, Denethor himself. The steward of Gondor rarely descended from his high seat to walk the lower walls. But tonight, if one could call this perpetual twilight night, he had made an exception. Mithrandir, Denethor said. His voice carried the weight of authority and something else, hunger perhaps. I would speak with our new ally. I am not your ally, Frieren said before Gandalf could reply. I have made no pledge to Gondor. Denethor's expression did not change, though his eyes sharpened. You stand on our walls. You observe our enemy. If you are not with us, then you grant our foes intelligence of our defenses. I grant nothing. I observe a threat to the stability of the region. Whether I act depends on whether the threat merits action. My Lord Steward, Gandalf interjected. Perhaps we might discuss. Be silent, Grey Pilgrim. Denethor did not look at him. His focus remained fixed on Frieren with the intensity of a man measuring a weapon. Lady, you say you are no ally. Very well. But neither are you our enemy, or you would have struck already. What then do you seek, Goldland? A seat in the councils of the great? I seek nothing from you. Everyone seeks something. Then I am not everyone. The simplicity of it seemed to strike Denethor harder than defiance would have. He recovered quickly, but Gandalf saw the flicker of confusion before the mask reasserted itself. The enemy gathers his strength, Denethor said. Within days, perhaps hours, he will loose his full fury upon this city. We have brave men, strong walls, but we lack one thing of power to match his sorcerers and wraiths. You possess such power. I have seen it in the way the men speak of you, in the fear you place in hearts accustomed to terror. Aid us. When the battle comes, turn your strength against Mordor's creatures, and Gondor will. Will what? Frieren interrupted. Reward me, I require no reward. Bind me, I do not bind easily. Remember me, I will be gone when this is finished. Then why are you here? She looked at him with something that might have been pity, though her face remained neutral. Because that, she gestured toward the east, is a problem. And I am good at solving problems. Denethor opened his mouth, closed it. Gandalf watched the steward's pride war with his desperation. Pride had ruled Denethor for so long, but desperation was a newer wound, deeper and more raw. You will solve it then, Denethor said finally, on your terms, without obligation or gratitude. If I determine it requires solving, yes. And if you determine otherwise, then I will leave, and you will face what you would have faced regardless. The words hung in the air like a sentence. Gandalf could see the calculation moving behind Denethor's eyes, the assessment of risks, the weighing of pride against survival. The tower guard shifted uneasily behind their lord. I do not trust power without loyalty, Denethor said. That is wise, Frieren replied. Yet you ask me to place the fate of my city in your hands. I ask nothing. You are free to refuse my presence. Order me from your walls. I will go. It was masterfully done, Gandalf realized with growing unease. Not a challenge, not a threat. Simply a statement of fact that forced Denethor to choose between his authority and his city's survival. The steward could command her to leave and preserve his control, or accept her presence and admit his weakness. Denethor's jaw tightened. You will have quarters in the 6th circle. Food and water will be provided. Captain, see to it." "I need neither quarters nor provisions," Frieren said. "But thank you." She turned back to her observation of the eastern darkness, dismissing them as easily as one might dismiss servants. It was not rudeness, precisely. More like a return to the task she found actually important. Denethor stared at her back for a long moment. Then, without another word, he turned and strode away, his guards scrambling to keep pace. Gandalf heard him mutter something to one of the captains, too low to make out, but the tone was acid. When they were alone again, Gandalf said, "You make enemies quickly." "I do not make anything. People make themselves my enemies if they choose." "Denethor is dangerous when crossed." "Then he should not cross himself by trying to own what cannot be owned." Gandalf sighed. "You truly do not understand the politics of this place, do you?" "I understand them." She glanced at him. "I simply do not participate in them. Politics are local concerns. The pattern I am tracking is not." "And if I asked you to leave for the good of this city, for the stability of—" "You would not ask that." "How do you know?" "Because you are afraid of the same thing I am observing." She turned to face him fully for the first time since they had begun speaking. "There is a will attempting to dominate this entire region. Not conquer, dominate. Erase choice at a fundamental level. You feel it even if you do not have the framework to describe it. You would not ask me to abandon such a problem because you hope I might solve it in a way you cannot." The accuracy stung. Gandalf gripped his staff tighter. "And can you?" "I do not know yet. I need more information." "What sort of information?" "How the pattern maintains itself, where the nodes of control are distributed, whether the central authority can be disrupted without collapsing the entire—" She stopped. "You do not need the technical details. Suffice to say, I am determining if intervention is possible without making things worse." "Making things worse than Sauron triumphant?" "Yes." The single word fell like a stone into still water. Gandalf stared at her, this pale-haired mage, who spoke of powers and patterns with the dispassion of a scholar examining old texts. "What could be worse?" he asked quietly. She did not answer immediately. Far below, a horn sounded 3 notes, harsh and urgent, the signal for attack. Men began running to their positions, officers shouting orders that were swallowed by the sudden thunder of war drums from beyond the wall. Frieren looked toward the sound without alarm. "That," she said. "If I solve it incorrectly, that could be much worse." Then she stepped off the wall. Gandalf lunged forward, but she was already gone, dropping 3 stories to the outer courtyard, as if stepping down from a chair. She landed in a crouch, straightened, and began walking toward the gates. Around her, soldiers scattered, some calling out, others simply staring. The wizard watched her go, this stranger from beyond the world's circles, this power without allegiance or lord. And he felt for the first time in many long years something very close to helplessness. The drums grew louder. In the east, shapes moved against the darkness. And on the walls of Minas Tirith, Gandalf, the Grey, understood that the war had entered a phase for which he had no map, no counsel, and no clear path forward. He could only hope that when Frieren decided to act, it would be in time and in the right way. Neither hope seemed particularly reliable. The sound came first. A rhythm so deep, it traveled through stone rather than air felt in the bones before the ears registered it. Gandalf stood near the great gate of Minas Tirith and recognized the cadence immediately. He had heard it once before in tales from the elder days, though the instrument then had been different. Grond. the great battering ram of Mordor, named for the ancient hammer of the Dark Lord who had come before Sauron. Around him, the captains barked orders with voices that tried and failed to mask their dread. Companies rushed to reinforce the gate, carrying timber and iron to brace what centuries of craftsmanship had already made formidable. But Gandalf knew, as they must have known in the deepest part of themselves, that mere timber would not suffice. The drums continued. Boom, boom, boom. Each beat synchronized with the approach of something massive beyond the walls. The rhythm was not random. It carried intent, a measured declaration that what came could not be turned aside by hope or valor alone. Pippin appeared at his elbow, pale but steady. "What is that? War," Gandalf said. Then more softly, and worse than war. The gate shuddered. Not struck, not yet, but responding to proximity. The stones knew what approached them, and they were afraid. Gandalf gripped his staff and felt the wood warm beneath his palm awakening to meet the need. Then he saw her. Frieren had positioned herself on the wall directly above the gate. She had not been there moments before yet. There she stood now, as if she had always occupied that precise point of geometry. Her white robes barely stirred in the wind that whipped the banners of Gondor. She looked down at the gate, at the gathering defenders, at the darkness beyond, where Grond's approach could be heard, but not yet seen. "Get her down from there," a captain hissed to Gandalf. "When the ram strikes the hole—" "She knows where she stands," Gandalf interrupted. He did not know how he knew this, but certainty settled over him like a familiar cloak. "Leave her be." The captain opened his mouth to protest, but the gate shuddered again, harder this time, a grinding screech of metal under stress that made every man within earshot flinch. Grond had arrived. Through the gate's viewing slits, Gandalf caught glimpses of it, a ram's head, wrought in black iron larger than a house, mounted on a framework that required hundreds of orcs to maneuver. But those details mattered less than what he felt emanating from the device. This was not merely a weapon. It had been made with craft and malice intertwined, invested with the will to break not just wood and stone, but the confidence of those who sheltered behind them. The drums reached a crescendo, stopped. In the silence, a voice rang out cold, sharp, carrying the weight of ages. The Witch King had come to the gate. Gandalf could not make out the words from inside, but he felt their effect. The language was black speech, the tongue of Mordor that twisted the ear and soured the gut. But beneath the words ran something older. A claim of right, a declaration that these stones had no authority to stand, that the gate's purpose could be revoked by one with sufficient will and knowledge of its making. The gate groaned. Not from impact, from something else. "He is unmaking it," Gandalf whispered. "What?" Pippin's voice was very small. "The gate. He speaks its dissolution. Commands the iron to forget its forging, the wood to forget its cutting. This is old magic from when the world was younger and more malleable to such decrees." Even as he spoke, Gandalf felt the craft of his own power stirring in response. He could counter this, match his authority against the Witch King's pit, his understanding of Middle-earth's deep song against the twisted melodies Sauron's servant now sang. But the cost would be terrible. To clash wills at that level here at the threshold would drain him past recovery. And the battle was only beginning. The Witch King's voice rose higher. Grond struck. The impact was physical and metaphysical at once. The gate buckled inward, and Gandalf felt something fundamental shift in the city's defenses. First blow. The beginning of an inevitable sequence. 3 strikes, perhaps 5, and the gate would fail not through destruction, but through losing the memory of what it meant to resist. Men scattered from the gate's shadow. Captains shouted for the second line to form up, for archers to target the ram's handlers. But their commands sounded hollow against the Witch King's continued incantation. Another impact. Another grinding concession of metal and wood to the inevitability being imposed upon them. Then the rhythm broke. Not stopped. Broke. The drums stuttered mid-beat. The Witch King's voice faltered words, catching, as if the air had suddenly thickened against them. Grond struck a third time. But the blow landed wrong, off-center, without the ceremony that had charged the previous impacts. Gandalf looked up at the wall where Frieren stood. She had not moved. Her hands remained at her sides. Nothing visible connected her to what was happening below. Yet Gandalf felt it nonetheless, a subtle wrongness spreading through the architecture of the assault itself. Not a counterspell, for there was no spell to counter, more like a carefully placed absence, a gap where expected resonance should have been. The Witch King spoke again, but his words came slower now, each syllable requiring more effort. The claim he was making on the gate, the ancient right to unmake what had been made, was encountering something it could not classify. Not resistance. Resistance was expected built into the formula. This was different. This was the formula itself becoming uncertain whether it still applied. Grond struck a fourth time. The ram connected with the gate, but the sound was wrong. Too flat, too ordinary. Just metal hitting wood with none of the accumulated weight of destiny that had characterized the earlier blows. Gandalf descended from the inner wall and approached the gate as closely as he dared. Through the viewing slit, he saw Grond still positioned for another strike, saw the Nazgul mounted behind their king, saw the vast host of orcs stretching back into the darkness. But something in their formation had shifted. The drummers had stopped entirely. The Witch King himself had turned away from the gate to look at something. At the wall. At Frieren. The moment stretched. Gandalf felt the Witch King's attention like a cold blade against his skin, though the Wraith's focus was not on him. He was trying to understand what he faced. A defender, certainly. But what kind? What right did this pale figure claim to interfere with workings older than her people's language? The answer when it came was no answer at all. Frieren did nothing. She simply stood there, and in her standing, the certainty that Grond would break the gate began to erode. Not because she had greater power, though Gandalf suspected she might, but because the entire premise of the assault relied on a framework she did not acknowledge. It was like watching someone walk through a wall by genuinely failing to understand that walls were meant to be solid. The Witch King raised his hand. For a moment, Gandalf thought he would command another strike. Instead, the Lord of the Nazgul simply turned his mount and rode back into the darkness. Grond's handlers hesitated, then began the laborious process of withdrawing the ram. The drums did not resume. The assembled host of Mordor melted back into the shadows, as if the assault had never been intended to succeed in the first place. The defenders of Gondor stared at the gate, at the wall, at each other. Someone started to cheer. The sound caught and spread a wave of relief and disbelieving joy that echoed through all 7 circles. Gandalf did not cheer. He climbed the stairs to where Frieren stood, his legs heavier than they should have been, and when he reached her, he found her studying the gate below with the same neutral expression she had worn when observing the darkness beyond the city. "What did you do?" he asked. She glanced at him. "I introduced a variable they were not accounting for." "That tells me nothing." "It tells you everything that is relevant." She returned her gaze to the gate. Their magic functions through assertion of right. Claim and counterclaim. But I do not participate in that system. When their assertion met no counterclaim, only absence, the mechanism had no path to completion. You negated it. I stepped outside the argument. The result is similar. Gandalf felt a chill that had nothing to do with the wind. There are rules to magic in Middle-earth, ancient laws that govern what can and cannot be done, what prices must be paid, what authorities can be invoked. You speak as if these rules do not apply to you. They do not, she said simply. I am not bound by the covenants of your world. Then what is to stop you from? He stopped himself, but she finished the thought. From doing whatever I wish, nothing except my own judgment. She looked at him fully. Does that frighten you? Yes. Good, it should. She turned to descend from the wall. Fear is an appropriate response to power without external restraint. But you should direct that fear productively. Ask yourself what would frighten me more, that I am here or that I might not be here the next time they try this. She was gone before he could answer, walking down the stairs with that same unhurried pace, leaving Gandalf alone with the cheering city and a question he could not answer. Below, the captains were organizing a more thorough defense, bolstering what had been tested, but not broken. Pippin appeared at the stairway, concern clear on his face. Gandalf, are you well? No, the wizard said quietly. I am not. Because he had just witnessed something that should not have been possible. The Witch King of Angmar had stood before the gate of Gondor, invoking powers and rights that predated most kingdoms of men and had been turned aside not by greater power, but by a kind of power that refused to acknowledge the very framework in which such confrontations occurred. It was like watching someone cancel a duel by denying that swords were real. And the worst part, the part that settled like lead in Gandalf's stomach, was that he did not know if this was salvation or the opening act of something far more dangerous. The Witch King had withdrawn, yes. But wraiths did not know fear not in any conventional sense. They knew calculation. And the Lord of the Nazgul had just learned that his enemy possessed a capability his master had not anticipated. Sauron would adjust. The eye would turn its full attention to this new variable. And when that happened, Gandalf looked down at the celebrating city and felt the weight of prophecy shifting around him like tectonic plates, finding new equilibrium. Somewhere in the unseen halls of fate, a path that had been certain was now uncertain. A destiny that had been fixed was now contingent. He should have been relieved. Instead, he felt only the cold certainty that they had all just stepped into a story whose ending no longer matched the beginning anyone had expected. The drums of Mordor were silent. That silence was not comfort. It was recalculation. This part seriously gives me chills. Usually in the world of Middle-earth magic is all about destiny and big words. But for Frieren, she is totally different from others. She basically just says, no thanks to the rules. She did not use a bigger explosion. She just made the Witch King's curse fail because she did not participate in his game. Honestly, it's hilarious somehow. Like someone trying to hack your computer, but you just unplug the internet. It makes the Witch King look totally lost for the first time ever. Frieren is honestly another level. She's just too powerful for this fucking world. Arwen had ridden to war, knowing she might die. What she had not expected was to ride into something that felt less like battle and more like a question being answered in real time. The Pelennor field stretched before her, vast and dark beneath the perpetual twilight that Mordor's clouds had imposed. The host of the enemy covered the ground like a disease, thousands upon thousands of orcs and trolls and worse things that had crawled from forgotten places. Behind them, siege towers burned. Before them, the remnants of Gondor's outer defenses crumbled under relentless assault. This was the killing ground. This was where kingdoms came to end. She lowered her visor and felt her horse tense beneath her, sensing what was about to happen. Around her 6,000 riders of Rohan readied their spears. King Theoden sat tall in his saddle-gray beard, streaming in the wind that carried the stench of burning. Forth, Eorlingus. His voice rang clear, and 6,000 throats answered. They charged. The ground shook with the thunder of hooves. Éowyn felt her heart hammering in time with the rhythm, felt the old stories singing in her blood. This was what her people were made for, the headlong rush, the spear, and the cry, the moment when courage became the only currency that mattered. The orc line braced. Pikes lowered, archers drew. Then the wind changed, not shifted, changed, as if the air itself had been given new instructions. It came from the south now, hard and cold, carrying something that made Éowyn's horse stumble mid-stride. Not fear. The opposite of fear. A sudden, inexplicable absence of the dread that had been pressing against them since they first saw Mordor's host. The orcs felt it too. Their line wavered. Just slightly. Just enough. Rohan hit them like a breaking wave. Éowyn's spear found flesh, withdrew. Found flesh again. Around her riders were shouting, horses were screaming, and the organized chaos of cavalry impact rolled across the field. But something was different. The orcs were not fighting with their usual vicious cohesion. They stumbled, broke formation, turned on each other in confusion. She pulled her horse around and saw the reason. Frieren stood on the ruins of what had been Gondor's forward watchtower. She was not fighting. She simply stood there, white against the darkness, and wherever her gaze turned, the fabric of the battlefield seemed to lose its certainty. An orc company attempting to flank the Rohirrim suddenly found their footing unstable, though the ground had not visibly changed. A troll raising its club to crush a fallen rider simply stopped as if it had forgotten what it meant to swing downward. A Nazgul diving toward the melee pulled up sharply, its fell beast shrieking in what almost sounded like confusion. This was not the magic Éowyn had heard of in songs. There were no words of power, no flash of light. It was more like watching reality itself develop a stutter, brief moments where cause and effect lost their thread. She drove her spear into an orc that had not seen her coming, its attention fixed on something that was no longer there. When she withdrew the blade, the creature fell without understanding why. The Rohirrim pressed forward. What should have been a grinding meat grinder became something else, a rout. Not because they were winning, but because the enemy had lost the ability to coordinate their overwhelming numbers. Companies of orcs found themselves isolated, surrounded their reinforcements delayed by ground that had become treacherous in ways no map could predict. Éowyn saw King Theoden riding toward the standard of Mordor's commander, his banner bright against the darkness. She spurred her horse to follow, and for a moment she believed they might actually break through. Might actually turn this tide. Then the sky darkened further, and the Witch King descended. Aragorn had fought in many battles, but he had never fought in one that felt like it was being argued rather than waged. He stood in the breach where Gondor's outer wall had fallen, his blade wet with black blood, and watched the impossible unfold. The enemy had numbers, position, and momentum. By every tactical consideration, they should be overwhelming the defenders. Yet they were not. The battlefield was fracturing, not visibly. The armies were still engaged, still hacking and dying across miles of contested ground. But the coherence that made an army more than a mob had begun to dissolve. Supply lines that should have been secure found themselves blocked by obstacles that had not existed minutes before. Commanders issuing orders discovered their subordinates could not hear them, though no sound had been raised to drown them out. It was like watching a body lose connection with its limbs. Aragorn cut down an orc that had broken from its unit, already lost and panicking. He saw a dozen more in similar states, wandering the field without direction. And he saw far across the churned earth the pale figure on the tower who was somehow the center of this unraveling. "She is changing the terms," Gandalf said, appearing at his shoulder. The wizard's face was grim. Not fighting the battle. Changing what it means for a battle to occur here. Can she do that? Apparently. An orc captain tried to rally its forces, bellowing orders in the harsh tongue of Mordor. The creatures around it turned to obey, and then simply did not. Not from fear or rebellion, but as if the concept of obeying had briefly become optional. By the time the impulse reasserted itself, the unit had scattered. Aragorn felt something cold settle in his chest. This was victory, yes. But what did victory mean when it came through a power that could simply decide the rules, no longer applied? "Where does this end?" he asked. Gandalf did not answer. He was staring at the sky where the Nazgul had been circling. They were withdrawing now, pulling back toward Mordor with a haste that suggested not retreat but recalculation. All except one. The Witch King had descended to Pellennor's center, where the battle still raged hottest. His fell beast's scream cut through the chaos, and for a moment every combatant froze. This was not the fear aura that usually accompanied the Lord of the Nazgul. This was something older. A declaration. The battlefield remembered how to be a battlefield. The orcs, released from whatever had been confusing them, surged forward with renewed purpose. Trolls that had been standing idle suddenly roared back into violence. The machinery of Mordor's assault re-established itself, but it was too late. The Rohirrim had already broken through. Gondor's defenders had already reformed their lines. The window of disarray had been enough to shift the entire balance of the field. Aragorn saw Éowyn riding toward the Witch King, saw the moment she should have been swept aside by terror and dark sorcery. But that moment stretched, hesitated, as if something was interfering with the Witch King's authority to impose inevitability upon his victims. He started running. "Dana-san," Éowyn knew with the certainty of someone who had spent years watching others ride to glory, while she remained behind, that this was her moment. Not given, not inherited, hers. The Witch King towered above her. His blade raised his voice, already speaking her death in the black speech. She should have been paralyzed, should have been crushed by the sheer weight of ancient malice and dark authority he carried. But she was not. Something held the fear at bay. Not courage, she had brought that herself. Something else. A space where the Witch King's command over terror had less purchase than it should. As if the mechanism he used to impose dread had encountered interference, it did not know how to process. She struck. Her blade, guided by Merry's desperate attack from behind, found the gap between helm and crown. The Witch King's scream tore the air, but it was not the scream of triumph or curse. It was surprise. Genuine mortal surprise. He fell. Éowyn fell with him, her arm shattered by forces she barely understood. She lay on the blood-soaked ground and heard cheering in the distance. Heard Rohan's horns sounding victory. Felt hands lifting her carefully, heard voices calling for healers. But she also heard very faintly a sound like a door closing. Something that had been possible was now foreclosed. Something that had been open to challenge was now settled. The Witch King's body dissolved into tatters of cloth and darkness, leaving only the echo of what had been. By the time Aragorn reached Éowyn, she was unconscious but breathing. Merry lay nearby, pale and still. Around them, the battle was ending. Not from defeat, but from the collapse of Mordor's coordination. Companies of orcs fled. Trolls rampaged without direction, as likely to attack their own as the enemy. The siege engines sat abandoned. Gondor had held. Rohan had triumphed. The day, by any measure, was won. Gandalf appeared beside the fallen, his staff glowing faintly as he assessed their wounds. "They will live," he said quietly. "But they paid the price that was required." Aragorn looked across the field to where Frieren was descending from the tower. She moved through the aftermath with the same measured pace she had used when first appearing on Minas Tirith's walls. Men parted before her, some bowing, others simply staring. "Did she know," Aragorn asked, "that Éowyn and Merry would be the ones—" "I do not think she planned it." Gandalf knelt beside Merry, checking the hobbit's pulse. "But I think she allowed it. Created the conditions where their courage could matter rather than be smothered under inevitability. Is that better or worse than simply killing the Witch King herself?" "I do not know." The wizard stood leaning heavily on his staff. "She preserved the story, at least. The victory belongs to those who earned it. But the conditions that made the victory possible—" He did not finish. He did not need to. Frieren stopped at the edge of the killing ground, looking not at the fallen or the celebrating, but east, toward Mordor, toward something she was tracking with senses Aragorn could not comprehend. Then she tilted her head, a gesture so small it might have been imagination. But Aragorn saw it. Saw the moment she registered something that made her expression shift from neutral to interested. Not satisfied, not concerned, interested. She turned and walked toward the city, passing through the celebrating soldiers like a stone through water. Some reached out to touch her cloak, to thank her, to call her blessed. She did not acknowledge any of it. Gandalf watched her go, his face troubled. "The Witch King is destroyed," he said softly. "The siege is broken. Gondor stands. These are good things, Aragorn, necessary things. But the war has just learned it is no longer the war it thought it was." The wizard turned toward him, and his eyes were older than Aragorn had ever seen them. Sauron felt that. Every moment of what happened here. He felt his servants falter against something they were not designed to confront. And now, he is adapting. Can he adapt quickly enough? That depends. Gandalf looked to where Frieren had disappeared into the city. On whether she has already chosen her next move. Above them, the darkness remained. The clouds of Mordor had not lifted. The eye, distant and terrible, still burned in the east. And though the immediate danger had passed, Aragorn felt no relief. Only the growing certainty that they had solved one problem by introducing another larger one. The soldiers were singing. Gondor's banners were being raised over reclaimed ground. Wounded were being carried to healers, and the dead were being honored. But beneath it all, beneath the celebration and relief, something fundamental had shifted. The battlefield had learned it could be negotiated with. Authority had learned it could be questioned. And the certainty that had governed Middle-earth's conflicts for ages had discovered it was no longer quite so certain. Aragorn helped lift Éowyn onto a stretcher, noting how peaceful she looked despite her injuries. She had achieved what prophecy had long suggested: no man could kill the Witch King. And it was a woman who had struck him down, but prophecy had required help. And that help had come from someone who did not believe in prophecy at all. The implications of that would take longer to settle than any wound. Éowyn had imagined death many times. In the long years kept behind in Edoras while men rode to glory, she had pictured 100 ways she might die if given the chance. Clean and swift with a blade in her hand. Slow and bitter, trapped by duty and expectation. Forgotten, unmourned, having never lived at all. She had not imagined it would come with wings. The fell beast descended through smoke and ash, its rider a void, where light went to die. The Lord of the Nazgul had come to Pellennor's heart, and everything within 100 paces understood that something absolute had arrived. Not merely dangerous, absolute. Her horse bolted. She could not blame it. Every instinct in her own body screamed to run, to hide, to become small enough that this ancient malice might pass over without noticing. But she had spent too many years being small, too many years watching others claim the moments that defined them. She dismounted, drew her blade. The Witch King's fell beast landed 20 paces away. The ground cracked beneath its talons. Its rider sat motionless in the saddle, a crown glinting, where a head should have been, robes empty of anything resembling a living form. When he spoke, his voice came from everywhere and nowhere. "Thou fool! No living man may hinder me." The words carried weight beyond sound. They were not a threat. They were a law being pronounced old and tested and true. She had heard stories of the Witch King's invincibility, of the doom laid upon him in ages past. Prophecy armor, more certain than steel. Her legs wanted to lock. Her heart wanted to burst. Every part of her that had been raised to be reasonable, to be safe, to survive another day, begged her to yield. She did not. But neither did she charge. Not yet. Something held her, though she could not name it. A sense that this moment was still building, that the architecture of this encounter was not yet complete. The air itself felt strange, as if multiple outcomes were still possible, and the world had not yet decided which one would manifest. The Witch King dismounted. His blade emerged from its sheath with a sound like bone scraping stone. He advanced, and with each step the weight of his presence increased. This was what it meant to face something that had endured beyond death, that had centuries to learn how to impose its will upon reality. Éowyn raised her sword. Her arms shook. Not from weakness, from honesty. She was afraid, terrified. And there was no shame in that truth. Then very faintly the pressure eased. Not gone, not even significantly reduced. But where before the fear had been total, crushing, unavoidable, now it had gaps. Moments where breath came easier. Spaces where thought was possible. As if someone had cracked open a window in a room that had been airless. She did not understand what had changed. Did not have time to wonder. The Witch King was upon her. His blade descended. She parried, and the impact nearly shattered her arm. He was strong beyond mortal measure, and she was merely a woman who had trained in secret and ridden to war against all counsel. The gap between them was absurd. He struck again. She deflected barely, and the force drove her back 3 steps. Her hands went numb. Her shoulders screamed protest. One more blow like that, and her defense would crumble. But he hesitated. For just an instant, the Witch King paused. His blade hung in the air, and Éowyn saw, or thought she saw, his empty cowl turn slightly, as if searching for something that should have been there, but was not. Some mechanism he relied upon had failed to engage. She did not question the gift. She lunged. Her blade caught his knee, or where a knee should have been, and rebounded as if striking iron. But it was not repelled entirely. The enchantments that protected him from mortal harm held yes, but they did not throw her blade back with the contempt they should have. They merely resisted. It was like pushing against a door that had been locked, but now stood only closed. The Witch King recovered. His blade swept down in an arc meant to cleave her in 2. She threw herself aside, hit the ground hard, felt something in her shoulder give way. Pain lanced through her white and pure. She tried to rise and could not. Her sword arm hung useless. This was it then. She had tried, failed. At least she had failed while trying. The Witch King loomed over her. His blade rose for the killing stroke. A small shape darted from the smoke. Merry, the hobbit she had carried into battle sworn to protect. He was screaming something wordless, his barrow blade raised high. The Witch King turned dismissive. Merry's blade struck true. It was a weapon from an older age, forged by those who had fought the Witch King's master in the ancient north. When it bit into the Nazgul's leg, something broke. Not the blade, not the flesh, for there was no flesh. Something deeper. A binding. A constraint that had held him outside the normal rules of death. The Witch King shrieked. It was not pain, not as mortals understood pain, but surprise. Genuine, complete surprise that anything could touch him. That the armor of prophecy and ancient doom could be pierced by a hobbit with a forgotten sword. Éowyn rose. Her good arm barely had strength left. Her vision swam. But in the Witch King's moment of shock in the space opened by Merry's impossible courage, she saw the opening, the target. The place where crown met cow, where whatever held this thing in the shape of kingship was most exposed. She drove her blade upward with everything she had left. The Witch King screamed again. Properly this time. The sound tore at reality itself, and Éowyn felt her blade connect with something that should not have existed. The resistance was immense, pressing back against her, trying to deny that this was possible, that a woman's hand could end what no man could threaten. But the resistance was not total. There were gaps in it. Moments where the absolute certainty of the Witch King's invulnerability wavered just enough. And in those gaps, mortal strength was sufficient. Her blade found home. The crown fell first. Then the robes collapsed inward, empty, containing nothing but the echo of malice that had worn them for so long. The Witch King of Angmar, eldest and mightiest of the nine, dissolved into memory and darkness. Éowyn collapsed beside him. Dashida! She woke to voices. Gentle hands lifting her. Someone pressing water to her lips. Pain everywhere, singing through every nerve, but beneath it, something else. Completeness. As if she had finally answered a question that had been following her since childhood. Easy, a man's voice said. Aragorn, you have done more than any had right to ask. The Witch King is gone, undone by your hand and the hobbit's blade. His face swam into focus above her. You have achieved what prophecy long foretold, though in a manner none expected. She tried to ask what he meant, but exhaustion dragged her words away. She was aware of being carried of Merry somewhere nearby, also being tended. Of victory spreading through the ranks like dawn finally breaking through Mordor's clouds. But she was also aware of something else. A presence that had been there during her confrontation, neither helping nor hindering. Simply observing, and perhaps at critical moments, creating space where there should have been none. Later, much later, when she had strength to speak again, she asked Aragorn about it. Did the elf lady intervene? He was quiet for a long time. I do not know. Gandalf believes she held something back. That the Witch King's dominion over fear, his ability to paralyze enemies with dread, was less absolute than it should have been. Then I did not. You did everything that mattered. His voice was firm. You chose to stand. You struck the blow. The victory is yours, Éowyn. Never doubt that. But she did doubt. Not her courage. Not her right to have been there. But whether courage alone would have sufficed without that strange loosening of inevitability she had felt in the Witch King's presence. Gandalf visited her as healers worked on her injuries. The wizard looked older than she remembered, worn by concerns that went beyond this single battle. You wonder if it counts, he said without preamble. If the victory was truly yours when conditions were adjusted. She nodded, unable to voice the question. "Let me tell you what I saw," Gandalf said. "I saw a woman ride to war, knowing she would likely die. I saw her stand when flight was possible. I saw her raise her blade when surrender would have been reasonable. And I saw her strike true when the moment came, regardless of what forces might have influenced that moment's arrival." He leaned on his staff, and his eyes were kind. "The Witch King died to your hand and Mary's blade. That is the truth that will be remembered. That is the truth that matters." But the elf lady made a choice. His expression shifted, became more complex. Perhaps the most interesting choice I have witnessed her make. She could have ended the Witch King herself. I believe that, absolutely. But she did not. She stood aside and allowed human courage to write its own legend. "Why, that's Yolf Dior," Gandalf said softly, "is the question that troubles me most. Because it means she understands something about the nature of victory that I had not expected her to comprehend." He left her to rest, and Eowyn lay in the healer's tent, listening to the sounds of a one battle of men celebrating of horns, calling the living home. She had struck down the Witch King. That was true. It was also true that she might not have succeeded without something, some gap in inevitability that should not have existed. She decided, as sleep claimed her, that she would carry both truths. The one people would sing in halls, and the one that sat quieter in her heart. She had been brave. She had also been fortunate in ways that defied explanation. Perhaps that was enough. Perhaps that was more than enough. Outside the tent, Frieren stood alone on a ridge overlooking the aftermath. She had watched Eowyn strike down the Witch King, had felt the machinery of prophecy engage and fulfill itself, had noted with clinical interest how human determination could crack open spaces in deterministic outcomes. She had also felt something else. Something larger, more distant, but far more concerning than any Nazgul. A signal, faint but unmistakable, moving through the landscape of Middle-earth's magical architecture. The ring was on the move, and it was heading exactly where such things always ended up, heading toward the one place it should never reach. She turned east toward Mordor and made a decision she would not share with anyone until it was already complete. The war of armies was ending. The war that mattered was about to begin. And this time she would not stand aside. Gandalf found her, where he knew he would, on the highest point of Minas Tirith's outer wall facing east, as if she could see through the darkness to whatever lay beyond. The celebrating had faded to exhaustion. Men slept where they had fought or tended wounds, or stood watch with the wary relief of those who knew one victory did not end a war. The Pelennor fields were littered with the debris of armies, and the work of sorting friend from foe, living from dead, would take days. But Frieren stood apart from all of it, her attention fixed on something no one else could perceive. "You are leaving," Gandalf said. It was not a question. "Yes. When? Soon, perhaps now." She did not turn. "There is something I need to address." The ring. That got her attention. She glanced at him, and for the first time since they had met, he saw something in her expression beyond neutral assessment. Interest, perhaps, or recognition that he understood more than she had credited. "You know of it," she said. "I have known of it for a very long time." Gandalf moved to stand beside her, though he kept his gaze on the horizon rather than her face. "Longer than you have been in this world, I suspect." "Then you understand why I must go to it." "On the contrary, I understand precisely why you must not." She was quiet for a moment, considering. "Explain." "The ring is not a tool Gandalf said. That is the first thing to understand. It is not a weapon to be wielded, not a key to be turned. It is corruption given form. It does not grant power. It teaches you that power is all that matters. It does not make you strong, it makes you certain. And certainty in the face of complexity is the most dangerous thing there is. I have encountered items that corrupt the user before. Not like this. He turned to face her fully. Listen to me, Frieren. I do not know what you are, where you came from, or by what right you walk among us. But I know this, the ring was made by Sauron, who was a Maya of great cunning and power. It carries his will, his malice, and his absolute conviction that all things must be brought under his dominion. It does not corrupt through weakness. It corrupts through strength, through the very virtues that make someone worthy of opposing it. And you think I would fall to this corruption? I think you would believe you had not. Gandalf's voice was steady, but beneath it ran an urgency he could not fully mask. That is how it works. You would take it intending to use it against Sauron. You would believe yourself above its influence because you come from beyond these circles, because your magic operates on different principles. And in that belief you would be lost before you even put it on. Frieren considered this. What if you are wrong? Then you will have destroyed Sauron and become something worse in his place. Worse than genocidal domination. Yes, the word came harder than Gandalf intended. Because Sauron is known. His nature is understood. He seeks dominion through force and terror and the corruption of wills. Terrible, but at least familiar. What you could become wielding a power meant to enslave this world with methods this world does not comprehend. That would be something new. Something for which there would be no defense, no prophecy, no hope of resistance. She was quiet for a long time. When she spoke, her voice was softer than he had heard it before. Someone I knew once told me that the greatest mistake is to arrive too late to matter. She still faced east, and Gandalf thought he detected something in her posture that might have been grief. I have spent a very long time learning that lesson. Understanding what it means to delay, to hesitate to believe, there will be time later. And by the time I learned it, the person who taught me was gone. Frieren, I have watched your war, she continued. I have seen the pattern. Sauron is not satisfied with conquest. He seeks to unmake the possibility of resistance. Every generation that fights him is weaker than the last. Every victory costs more than the one before. This is not a war that can be won through valor or sacrifice. It is a war of attrition against hope itself. There is another way, Gandalf said. The ring can be destroyed. Hobbits carry it even now toward that very purpose. And if they fail, then we face what comes with the strength we have. For how long? She turned to him now, and her green eyes were colder than he remembered. Another age too. How many generations will you ask to bleed while you hope for a better solution? How many lives are acceptable losses in the name of moral purity? It is not about purity. It is always about purity when those with power choose not to act. Her voice remained level, but something sharp had entered it. I have seen this pattern before. The virtuous waiting for the perfect moment, the perfect method while the body count rises. At what point does inaction become complicity? Gandalf felt his own anger rising to meet hers, but he forced it down. This was not a debate to be won through passion. You speak of patterns. Let me tell you the pattern I see. A power from beyond our understanding arrives in a desperate hour. It offers swift resolution, an end to suffering, a way to cut through the moral complexity of war. And in accepting that offer, we trade one tyrant for another. The names change. The methods change. But the fundamental violation, the imposition of will upon free peoples, that remains constant. I do not seek to impose will. Then what do you seek? She was silent. For a moment Gandalf thought he might have reached her. Then she spoke, and her words carried a finality that chilled him more than any threat could have. To finish what should have ended long ago. And if finishing it requires you to become what you sought to end, then at least it will be finished. Gandalf felt something in him break. Not his resolve, he had faced darker moments than this and held firm. But his hope that this conversation might matter, that reason and counsel might turn aside what was coming. I cannot stop you, he said quietly. No, but I can ask you to wait. To see if the hobbits succeed. To give free will one more chance to triumph before you take that choice away. Frieren looked at him for a long moment. He could not read her expression. Then she said, How long, say? Days, perhaps a week. And in that week, how many will die? He had no answer. Could have offered platitudes about necessary sacrifice, about the long view of history, about the importance of preserving the means by which victories were won. But faced with her clinical assessment, those words felt hollow. I will give you 3 days, she said. If the ring is destroyed in that time, I will leave your world and never return. If it is not. She did not finish, did not need to. 3 days, Gandalf repeated. It was not enough, was possibly too much, but it was what she was offering, and he had no leverage to demand more. There is one thing I do not understand, Frieren said. You speak of the ring's corruption, of how it twists the worthy toward domination. But you yourself could have taken it at any time. Why did you not? Because I know myself too well. Gandalf smiled without humor. I would use it from a desire to do good, and that desire would not change when the ring turned every good intention into chains. I would look at the world I had enslaved and call it liberation. That is why those who are wise enough to wield the ring are precisely those who must never touch it. Then send those who are unwise. We have 2 hobbits who desire nothing more than their gardens and their books, who carry the ring not from ambition but from duty, who resist it not through strength but through their very ordinariness. He met her gaze. That is the hope, Frieren. Not that power will overcome power, but that simplicity might succeed where wisdom fails. She nodded slowly. Then I hope your hobbits are swift. As do I. She turned away from him, facing east again. And Gandalf knew with a certainty that hurt that their conversation was over. Whatever happened in the next 3 days would determine whether Frieren remained an enigma to be puzzled over, or a catastrophe to be endured. One more question, he said. Yes, if you take the ring, and it corrupts you, as I fear if you become what you sought to destroy, will there be anyone in your world who could stop you? She was quiet for a long time. Then very softly, No. Gandalf felt the weight of that admission settle over him like a shroud. Then I pray 3 days is enough. He left her there, standing vigil over a darkness she intended to confront with methods he could barely comprehend. And as he descended the stairs, he felt older than he had in centuries. Not physically, his form was borrowed and could not truly age, but in some deeper place where weariness accumulated like sediment. They had survived the battle. They might yet survive the war. But what came after, if Frieren walked into Mordor and took up Sauron's weapon as her own? That was a future Gandalf could not calculate, could not prepare for, could not prevent. He could only hope the hobbits were as resilient as he believed, and that 3 days would be enough for simplicity to triumph over every more sophisticated solution. Behind him, Frieren remained on the wall, counting down hours to a decision that would remake everything, or end it entirely. The city slept. The darkness waited. And the ring, wherever it lay, pulsed with the promise of dominion to anyone strong enough, certain enough, or foolish enough to claim it. Frodo had stopped feeling his feet sometime during the previous night, or what he thought was night. Time had become unreliable in Mordor, measured only in the distance between one labored breath and the next. Sam supported him up the rocky slope, their progress measured in yards, won through will alone. The ring hung against Frodo's chest, heavier than any physical weight had right to be. It whispered constantly now, a litany of promises and accusations that blurred together until he could no longer tell which thoughts were his own and which belonged to the thing he carried. They had escaped the tower. That much was real. The orcs had turned on each other in confusion, and in the chaos, Sam had found him, and together they had fled into the broken lands north of the Furnace Plains. Somewhere ahead, if they could only reach it, stood Mount Doom. The end of the quest. The end of everything. "Just a bit further, Mr. Frodo," Sam said, though his voice carried a hollowness they both recognized as false hope. Frodo wanted to answer, but lacked the strength. The ring's voice was louder now, more insistent. It told him he could stop, that he deserved rest, that he had earned the right to claim what he carried, to use it as it was meant to be used, to end this suffering through strength rather than sacrifice. He knew these thoughts were not entirely his own, but knowing that and resisting it were growing further apart with each step. They crested a ridge, and Frodo saw the mountain. Closer than before, but still impossibly far. His legs gave out. Sam caught him, lowered him gently against a boulder. "We'll rest," Sam said. "Just for a moment. Then we'll—" He stopped. Frodo followed his gaze and saw her standing 20 paces away, as if she had been waiting there for years. The elf lady from Minas Tirith. Frieren. She stood with her back to them, facing east, toward something neither hobbit could see. Her white cloak barely moved in the hot wind that carried ash from the mountain. "Miss," Sam called out. His hand went to Sting's hilt. "What are you doing here?" She turned. Her expression was neutral, but Frodo felt something shift in the air around them. The ring grew suddenly warmer against his skin. "I followed the signal," she said simply. "What signal?" Sam's grip tightened on his sword. "There's nothing here but—" But Frodo understood. He felt it through the ring's growing heat, through the way his attention kept sliding toward her, despite every effort to look away. The ring recognized something. Someone. A candidate. "You should leave," Frodo managed. His voice was barely a whisper. "This place is not safe." "Nowhere is safe while that exists." She gestured toward his chest where the ring hung. "May I see it?" "No." The word came from Sam, sharp and certain. "You stay back. Whatever you think you're doing, whatever the ring is telling you." "It is not telling me anything." She took a step closer. "I am observing a phenomenon, a construct designed to dominate will across a population. It is remarkably well crafted, but the principle is consistent with other mechanisms I have encountered." Frodo tried to stand. Failed. Tried again. The ring was singing now, a chorus of certainty that drowned out his own thoughts. She could take it, the voices said. She was strong enough, worthy enough. She would not waste it on hesitation or moral cowardice. She would use it as it demanded to be used efficiently, completely, finally. "Mr. Frodo." Sam was at his side, steadying him. "What's wrong?" "The ring wants her," Frodo gasped. "Sam, it wants her so badly." Frieren studied him with that same clinical detachment she had shown when first arriving at Minas Tirith. "You have carried it far, farther than should have been possible for someone of your stature and nature. That is impressive." "We're taking it to the mountain," Sam said. His voice shook but held firm. "To destroy it. That's what we came to do." "I understand." She looked past them toward Mount Doom. "But you will not make it. The burden has exceeded what you can bear. I can feel it from here, the way it has woven itself into your thoughts, your sense of identity. If you continue, you will either fail at the crucial moment or succeed and be destroyed by the effort." "Then we fail," Sam said. "But we fail trying, not by handing it to someone who can end this." Frieren's gaze returned to Frodo. "I can take it to the mountain, if that is your wish. I can destroy it according to your plan. Or I can take it and use it to dismantle Sauron's dominion directly. Either way, the outcome is the same. Sauron falls." "No." Frodo forced the word out through the ring's chorus. "Not the same. Gandalf told us if someone strong takes it." "Gandalf told you many things." Her voice remained level. "He told you about corruption, about the ring's ability to twist noble intentions. He was not wrong. But he was also speaking from within a framework that assumes certain constants, that power must be earned through right, that authority flows from covenant, that dominion requires submission. I do not operate within that framework." She knelt, bringing herself to eye level with Frodo. This close, he could see that her expression held no malice, no hunger, only the same calm assessment she might give to a mathematical problem. "I am not offering to save you," she said quietly. "I am offering to finish what you started. The ring will not have the same hold on me it has on you, not because I am stronger, but because the mechanisms it uses to corrupt do not function the same way with my methods." "You're wrong." The words came from somewhere deep in Frodo, from a place the ring had not yet completely consumed. "It will corrupt you. Maybe not now. Maybe not in ways you recognize. But it will teach you that what you're doing is right, and that will be worse than anything Sauron ever achieved." She considered this. "Perhaps. But perhaps that risk is acceptable measured against the certainty of continued suffering under the current arrangement." "It's not your risk to take," Sam said. His sword was out now, though they all knew how useless it would be. "The ring was given to Mr. Frodo. The quest is his. You got no right to just, Sam." Frodo's voice was barely audible. "Put the sword down." "Mr. Frodo, no. Look at me." Sam did. What he saw made him lower the blade. Frodo could feel it, the way the ring was already deciding, already moving. It had recognized in Frieren something it could work with a will strong enough and certain enough to be worth claiming. And Frodo, exhausted to the point of disintegration, could no longer hold against both the ring's desire and his own knowledge that Sam was right. They would not make it to the mountain. They had come so far, endured so much, and they would fall short by miles or minutes, or the simple fact of human limitation. He reached up with trembling hands and lifted the chain over his head. The ring's voice became deafening, a roar of approval and anticipation. But beneath it, Frodo felt something else, relief. Terrible, shameful relief at no longer having to carry what he had never truly been strong enough to bear. "Mr. Frodo, please." Sam's voice broke. "I'm sorry," Frodo whispered. "Sam, I'm so sorry. I can't anymore." Frieren reached out. Her hand did not shake. Her expression did not change. And when Frodo placed the ring in her palm, she closed her fingers around it with the simple finality of someone completing a task. Nothing happened. No light. No transformation. No dramatic shift in the landscape. Frieren stood the ring held loosely in one hand and looked at it with the same neutral interest she had given everything else in Middle-earth. "Interesting," she said. "The mechanism is more intrusive than I expected." Sam scrambled to Frodo's side. "Are you Mr. Frodo? Can you hear me?" Frodo could. He could hear everything with painful clarity now that the ring's weight was gone. He could see Sam's face twisted with concern and anger and grief. Could see Frieren examining the ring like a scholar might examine an unusual artifact. Could see in the distance the mountain that they would now never reach. "I failed," he said. "No." Sam gripped his shoulders. "She tricked you. She came here because the ring called her." Frodo felt tears he had thought himself too dried out to produce. "And I gave it to her because I was not strong enough to finish what I started." "You were strong enough," Sam said fiercely. "You carried it farther than anyone else could have. If she hadn't shown up, we would have failed anyway." The truth of it settled like ash. "You know it's true, Sam. We both do." Frieren had put the ring on. There was no ceremony to it. She simply slipped it onto her finger as one might don any piece of jewelry. Sam tensed, reaching for his sword again, but Frodo stopped him with a gesture. They waited for the transformation, for the Dark Queen to emerge, for the corrupting power to take hold for everything Gandalf had warned them about to manifest. But Frieren just stood there looking at her hand with mild curiosity. "The whispers are persistent," she said more to herself than them. "But predictable. Dominion, control, certainty of purpose. It assumes I need convincing." She looked up at them. "I did not take this lightly. I understand what I am risking. But I also understand what is at stake if I do nothing." "You don't understand anything," Sam said. His voice shook with rage and helplessness. "You're from somewhere else, somewhere that doesn't need. You can't just walk into our world and decide how it ends." "I am not deciding how it ends." Frieren's expression remained neutral. "Sauron decided that when he created this. I am simply choosing the fastest path to end what should never have existed." She turned east toward Barad-dûr. In the distance, Frodo thought he saw the towers shift slightly, as if something vast had turned its attention toward them. "You should go back," Frieren said. "Find your way to the passes. The war will be over soon." "How?" Sam demanded. "What are you going to do? What needs to be done?" She walked away from them, heading not toward the mountain, but east toward the dark tower itself. Her white cloak made her easy to track against the broken landscape for perhaps 100 yards. Then, as if stepping through a door, she was simply elsewhere much further away than should have been possible in the seconds since they had last focused on her. Sam started to follow. Frodo caught his arm. "Let her go." "But Mr. Frodo." "It's done, Sam." Frodo felt hollowed out, scraped clean. "The ring is gone. The quest is over. We just have to hope Gandalf was wrong about what happens next." They sat together on the barren slope and watched Mordor begin to stir. In the distance, the eye atop Barad-dûr blazed brighter than before, no longer searching but focused on something specific, something new. Something that had just claimed the instrument of its master's power and was bringing it home like a declaration of war. Sam put his arm around Frodo's shoulders. Neither spoke. There were no words for what they felt, the mixture of relief and dread of gratitude and horror of knowing they had been saved from a burden they could no longer carry. while simultaneously understanding that the cost of that salvation had yet to be calculated. Above them, the smoke clouds began to move in new patterns. Below them, the armies of Mordor suddenly had a different priority than crushing the remnants of Gondor. And somewhere in the darkness ahead, Frieren walked toward the heart of Sauron's power, carrying the very weapon he had made to dominate all others. The war was not over. It had just changed into something neither hope nor prophecy had ever prepared them for. Okay, now, Cerisul. My jaw actually dropped here. Frodo finally gives in, but it is not to Gollum, it is to Frieren. And the way she takes the ring, well, there is no big dark transformation and no scary eyes. She just looks at it like a boring math homework assignment. She even calls the ring's whispers predictable, how flex that is. It shows she is on a whole different level compared to everyone else. But honestly, do you think she is actually safe from the ring's power, or is she just being overconfident? Well, maybe we could understand more in this next part of the story. Gandalf felt it first as a shift in pressure, like the moment before a storm breaks or a fever crests. He stood on Minas Tirith's highest wall watching the eastern horizon where Barad-dûr clawed at the sky. For days, as Frieren had promised, he had watched and waited, hoping against diminishing hope that the hobbits would reach the mountain, that prophecy and simple courage would prove sufficient. Instead, he had felt the moment the ring changed hands, a wrongness in the fabric of things, subtle but absolute. And now, hours later, he felt something else, the beginning of an ending that was not supposed to happen this way. Aragorn joined him, his face drawn. The orcs are withdrawing. Not fleeing, withdrawing. As if they received orders we cannot hear. They did. Gandalf's knuckles were white on his staff, but not from Sauron. Then from... Yes, they stood in silence, watching darkness shift, in ways that had nothing to do with clouds or wind. Something vast was happening in Mordor, a confrontation that operated on frequencies beyond mortal perception. Gandalf could feel it the way one feels a distant earthquake through tremors in the foundations of the world itself. Should we do something? Aragorn asked quietly. There is nothing we can do. This battle is not fought with swords or strategy. Gandalf's voice was heavy. It is a question being asked and answered in languages we do not speak. In the distance, Barad-dûr seemed to pulse. Not with light, with attention. The eye that had burned atop its pinnacle for so long suddenly had something to focus on that was not the scattered remnants of free peoples. Something new. Something that should not exist. Something that had claimed the instrument of its master's power and was now challenging the right to use it. The collapse began without fanfare. One moment Mordor's armies were repositioning, withdrawing from sieges that should have been victories. The next, they simply stopped. Not from death or rout, but from a more fundamental cessation, the loss of purpose that animated them. Gandalf watched an orc company halt mid-march. They stood in their ranks for several long seconds, weapons lowered, heads turning as if listening for orders that no longer came. Then slowly, they began to disperse, not fleeing, not attacking, simply leaving, walking away from formations that had been absolute minutes before. What's happening to them? A captain of Gondor appeared at Aragorn's elbow, his voice carrying equal parts relief and confusion. They are being released, Gandalf said softly. The will that bound them no longer has authority to command. Sauron is discovering what it means to have one's power turned against oneself. Across the Pelennor fields, trolls stood motionless as statues. Fell beasts circled aimlessly in the sky, their riders gone or silent. The coordinated malice that had driven Mordor's assault for weeks was draining away like water from a broken vessel. But there was no celebration in Minas Tirith. The men watched with the wary uncertainty of those who knew something unnatural was occurring, even if they could not articulate what. Aragorn's hand rested on his sword hilt. This is not how it was supposed to end. No, Gandalf agreed. It was supposed to end with a hobbit's choice made in fire and shadow, with the ring destroyed and Sauron's power broken through its unmaking, with victory earned through sacrifice rather than... He gestured toward Mordor, where the eye had begun to flicker. Rather than this. What is this? Gandalf searched for words and found none adequate. How to explain that they were witnessing not a defeat, but a transfer. That somewhere in Mordor's heart, Frieren was not destroying Sauron so much as displacing him, overriding the authority he had invested in the ring with an authority of her own. A hostile acquisition, he said finally. She is taking possession of the mechanisms he built, not breaking them, redirecting them. To what end? To his end, and perhaps in time to ours. The sky began to clear. It happened gradually, almost gently. The clouds that Sauron had drawn over Gondor and Rohan thinned. Gaps appeared through which actual daylight, the first in days, began to filter. Men looked up in wonder and growing dread, because this was not the triumphant dawn of victory, but something stranger and less comfortable. Gandalf felt the moment Sauron's presence in Middle-earth collapsed. Not died, Sauron was Maiar, and such beings could not be killed in any conventional sense. But the shape he had worn, the will he had imposed, the terrible certainty that had emanated from Barad-dûr, all of it suddenly lost cohesion. Like a hand releasing its grip, like a voice falling silent mid-sentence. The eye atop the dark tower flared, once brilliant and furious. Then it went dark. In the silence that followed, Gandalf heard distant sounds, the crash of structures in Mordor, giving way, the cries of orcs, suddenly freed from compulsion, the rumble of earth settling as forces that had been held in unnatural tension were released. And beneath it all, something else. A new pressure. Lighter than Sauron's, had been less overtly malicious, but no less absolute in its implications. "It's done," Aragorn said. His voice carried no triumph. "Sauron has fallen." "Yes, Han." "Then why do I feel as if we have lost something?" Gandalf turned to look at him. This man who would be king, who had walked the long road from Rivendell, to this moment who carried the weight of lineage and destiny in equal measure. And he saw in Aragorn's eyes the same understanding that sat like lead in his own heart. "Because we have," Gandalf said quietly, "we have lost the right to say our victory was our own." Below them, soldiers were beginning to realize the danger had passed. Hesitant cheers grew, spread through the ranks. Men embraced. Officers barked orders to tend the wounded, to secure the walls, to confirm what they all could see. The armies of Mordor were breaking, fleeing, or standing in confused clusters without leadership or purpose. But Gandalf watched Aragorn's face and saw no joy there. Only the dawning recognition of what it meant to rule a kingdom that had been saved by a power that owed it nothing and asked nothing in return. What authority did mortal kingship hold when everyone knew that the true decisive force was something else entirely? "She will leave," Aragorn said, more hope than certainty in his voice. "When this is finished, she will return to wherever she came from." "Perhaps." Gandalf's grip on his staff tightened. "But what has been demonstrated here will not leave with her. Middle-earth now knows that its ancient powers, its prophecies, its very framework of authority can be bypassed, set aside by someone who does not acknowledge their binding force. Is that so terrible if it means peace? Peace without the possibility of choice is not peace. It is merely well-managed control. Gandalf looked toward Mordor, where the last vestiges of Sauron's darkness were dissipating. Sauron sought to dominate through terror and corruption. What we have witnessed today is domination through efficiency. The latter may be kinder, but it is no less complete. A messenger arrived, breathless. "My lords, the enemy has broken entirely. They flee east or surrender or simply wander without purpose. The captains ask, should we pursue?" "No," Aragorn said, his voice carrying the weight of command, even as he struggled with its hollowness. "Let them go. There has been enough death." The messenger departed. Aragorn and Gandalf remained on the wall, watching daylight return to a world that had forgotten what it looked like. "What do we tell them?" Aragorn asked. "The men, the people? How do we explain what happened?" "We tell them the truth, that Sauron has fallen, that the shadow over Middle-earth has lifted, that peace has returned." Gandalf's voice was carefully measured. "We simply omit the method by which these things were achieved. That feels like cowardice. It is pragmatism. They will create their own stories, their own legends. Let them believe what brings them comfort. The full truth serves no one." "And what is the full truth?" Gandalf was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his words carried the weight of ages. "The full truth is that we stood at the brink of annihilation, and we were saved by a power we do not understand, whose methods we cannot replicate, whose very existence challenges everything we thought we knew about the nature of strength and authority in this world. The full truth is that Middle-earth's age of magic and wonder was already fading, but today it took a blow from which it may never recover. Not because evil triumphed, but because something demonstrated that our oldest powers, the valors commands the strength of Maiar, the weight of prophecy can be rendered irrelevant by sufficient external force." He turned to face Aragorn fully. "You will be king. A good king, I believe. But you will rule a world that has learned it can be solved like a problem, ended like a calculation. And that knowledge will change things in ways we cannot yet foresee." Aragorn looked out at his kingdom, at the city that had endured, at the people who would need him to lead them into whatever came next. "I don't know how to be king in that world." "Neither does anyone." Gandalf placed a hand on his shoulder. "But you will learn. You will build what can be built, and you will hope that Frieren meant what she said about leaving when her task was complete." As if summoned by her name, they both felt it, a change in the air, a lessening of that new pressure that had replaced Sauron's malice. Not gone, but withdrawing. Moving away from Barad-dûr, away from Mordor, tracing some path or purpose they could not follow. "She's leaving," Aragorn said. "Yes. Should we try to speak with her, to understand?" "No." Gandalf's voice was firm. "Let her go. Whatever we might learn from such a conversation, I do not believe it would bring comfort." They stood together as the sun broke fully through the clouds for the first time in days. It illuminated the Pelennor fields, where the living were already beginning the work of sorting through the dead. It shone on Minas Tirith's white walls, on banners being raised in tentative victory on a city that had endured against impossible odds. It was beautiful. It was terrible. It was the dawn of something new. And Gandalf, who had walked Middle-earth through 3 ages and countless trials, felt older than he ever had before. Not from exhaustion or despair, but from the knowledge that he had just witnessed the end of an era. He had thought already ending, hastened by forces beyond his capacity to guide or guard against. Sauron was defeated. The shadow had lifted. Peace had returned. But the world beneath that peace was fundamentally altered, and not all alterations were improvements. "Come," he said finally. "We have wounded to tend, and a realm to rebuild. The luxury of understanding can wait." They descended from the wall together, leaving behind the eastern horizon, where something vast had occurred and would occur no more. Behind them, Mordor lay broken, but not by the methods prophecy had foretold. Before them, a kingdom awaited leadership through an age that none of the wise had anticipated. And in the space between what had been and what would be Middle-earth, took its first uncertain breath of a future that was neither the triumph of good over evil, nor the victory of hope over despair, but something more complex and less comfortable. The peace that came not from earning victory, but from having it imposed by a power that asked no allegiance and offered no covenant. A peace without connection to those who lived beneath it. A peace that felt, despite all evidence to the contrary, like the beginning of a longer ending.
If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to the channel, and be sure to turn on notifications so you won't miss our future video. Thank you for watching, and we will see you next time.